Hey everyone, glad you've joined us again today. This is a bit unusual for a Sunday because some of you are going to be seeing this message online in your home or maybe somewhere else. At the same time that many are going to be gathering for worship in our drive-in worship Sunday that we've got planned at the Shopko parking lot. It's just another indication of the changes that we've experienced in our lives over these last 2 months and reflects also some of what we have lost. This virus has changed things so that we can't meet together here in our own building for the time being. We can't greet one another. You have to provide your own snacks and your coffee if you want them. You can't come and get them here any longer. No singing together, no handshakes, no high fives, no hugs. Many of us meeting together in cars in a parking lot today, and others isolated in homes throughout the area. But in spite of the limitations that we have right now, in spite of the lack of contact and the lack of community that has affected all of our lives, I hope that you aren't fooled. God's people do not have to resign themselves to the conclusion that all is loss. In these days, in this crisis, God's people must be looking for how He is wanting to bring some of the greatest blessings out of some of the great losses that we've experienced. About 5 years ago, I did a sermon series, and some of you might recall it, on several messages on suffering, human suffering, the suffering of pain that we experience. And I came across a concept by an author named Chris Tiegreen that I've never quite forgotten. In his book, Why a Suffering World Makes Sense. And here's the premise of that book. He says this: there are some attributes and blessings of God that can only be known through what is missing or what is lost in our lives. God reveals more of Himself through our tragedies and our suffering. So let me explain that. Let me unpackage that a little bit. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve enjoyed this perfect relationship with God. There was communication and there was intimacy with Him, and there was transparency without boundaries, transparency without shame. But I want you to keep in mind that God didn't create Adam and Eve with omniscience, with knowledge of all things like God Himself knows all things. Adam and Eve's knowledge was limited, as is ours. And so what they knew and what they understood was pretty much limited, I believe, to what they experienced. And for some period of time, from when they were created in Genesis chapter 1, and there's a little bit of a repeat of the creation story in Genesis chapter 2, but from the end of that part of Genesis chapter 2 until the end of the chapter 2, during that period of time, they experienced and they observed God while they were in the Garden of Eden, still untainted by sin. And we see that God is active with them in several ways in Genesis chapter 2. He puts them in the garden to work it and to care for it. He gives them instructions about what they could eat and what they definitely shouldn't eat. He brings the animals to Adam to name them. He causes Adam to fall into a deep sleep. He takes a rib out of Adam's side. He forms Eve and gives them to each other. And in all of these things, God is interacting with them. And as He's interacting with them, Adam and Eve grew in their understanding of Him. Perfectly satisfied, I believe, with what they experienced and what they discovered about God all throughout that chapter. And we don't know if that was days long or weeks long or months long or maybe even years long. But then they sinned. They purposely ate from the tree that God had forbidden them to eat from, the tree that God called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And certainly, right away, they experienced the knowledge of evil and the consequences of evil immediately. But I'd like to reflect on what the knowledge of good might have included. Because I believe that involves good that can only be known as a byproduct of evil, kind of like a package deal, totally unforeseen by Satan. Now consider this example. In Genesis chapter 3, verse 7, right after the fall, this is what we're told. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and they realized they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. So at this point in time, they knew and they understood more than when they were created. And for the first time, they feel the evil of shame. But the evil that they can now see and understand actually allows them to experience more good in return, more good as a byproduct of the evil. Because a little later on, God actually provides better clothes for them to wear, made from animal skins, better clothes than their fig leaf coverings that they had. They experience God now as a coverer of the shame that they were feeling. Think of it. Adam and Eve would never have experienced God as a coverer of their shame if they had never experienced shame. He reveals more of his goodness in response to their choice to do evil. Think about it and think about something else, somewhat parallel to this. In a similar way, would anyone experience the full depths of God as our Redeemer if they never experienced redemption from sin and loss themselves? I just finished reading through the book of Job, who experienced more loss than anyone in the Bible. Perhaps he experienced more loss than anyone else in history. And as a result of his losses, he eventually comes to this conclusion in Job chapter 19, verse 25. He says, I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. Only sin-filled people who have experienced loss and then find forgiveness experience that God is the great Redeemer. God's greatness is enlarged in our eyes because of all the loss that God promises to redeem. Similarly, people experience God more deeply as the great physician as a result of the diseases that they suffer from. If no one ever had sicknesses, we wouldn't know God to be a great healer. We could read about it in a book, or certainly God could reveal it about himself in some type of supernatural way. But listen to what Jesus says in Mark chapter 2, verse 17. This is what it says. Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. While Jesus isn't primarily referring to physical sickness and healing here, he makes a parallel truth that just like sick people are in need of a physician, and he is called by us, his followers, he is called the great physician, so sin-infected people are in need of a spiritual healer, and he is in the process of revealing himself as that healer. He may as well have added, healthy people don't even find out that I'm a healer. Only sick people do. So sickness's presence lets us experience more of who God is. And there are certainly numerous other examples. Let me share just a few more with you. Who would know that God is a sanctifier as we see him in Leviticus chapters 20 through 22 and elsewhere in Scripture? Who would know God as a sanctifier if we'd never struggled with the taint of sin, the infection of sin in our lives? Who would know God as the great comforter of John chapter 14, 15, and 16 if we never experienced grief or trouble? Who would know the depths of God as reconciler if we never went through broken relationships? And the list goes on and on. Let me give you an example that Nancy and I are actually kind of enjoying right now. Nancy has wanted a Bernese Mountain Dog since we first saw one at a soccer game that Andrew played in back in 2009. And 4 weeks ago, we bought one. Her name is Kina. That's short for Burkina, from Burkina Faso. That's the country where we worked in Africa for many years. Here's a photo of her. Isn't she adorable? I think the puppy is pretty cute too. Kina liked us from day one. But those first few days, there was a bit of sadness that she couldn't be with her 9 siblings or with her mother. There was a lot of crying and squealing at night, especially as she was lonely in her little kennel. In the last month, though, that we have had her, Kina has experienced much more of us than she knew early on day 1 or day 2. Kina thinks we're great providers. Every day she gets more than enough food. She never knew how great of providers we were if she would never know how great of providers we were if she didn't experience hunger pains. Kina had a run-in with our cat early on. The cat doesn't seem to be impressed with our new puppy. And the thought hit me, I'm not sure that cats are ever impressed with anything. Anyway, Kina knows now that we are her protector from our grumpy old cat with his sharp claws. Our hope is that she'll find out also that we are peacemakers, as we do want the dog and the cat to be friends, but there isn't much indication that that's taking place anytime soon. So far, the cat has given zero indication that he wants to be reconciled with the puppy. Andrew and Abby, our son and his wife, they came home last week. Andrew had recently bought a new Second Amendment purchase that he wanted to try out, so we set out some cans back in the woods behind our house, and Andrew did some target practice while I held Keena, who was not a very big fan. She trembled at virtually every gunshot, but she thought I was a pretty good comforter in that process. And Keena knows that Nancy is her primary sanctifier. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch to use that term about a human being. Keena knows that Nancy is her main cleaner-upper because she messes. She messes a lot. But if she didn't mess, she would never know of my abilities, but especially of Nancy's abilities to make her clean. You see, when she got into the car with us 4 weeks ago, she didn't know any of that about us. But because she makes messes and has experienced the cat's claws, the hunger pains, and really loud gunshots, she thinks we're pretty great people. Without pain or suffering, without failure or loss, without fear or grief or broken relationships, I would know far less about who God is than I do, because I have walked those paths of pain and suffering and fear and grief. So here's my point. Whatever loss or losses we might be experiencing during this time, they all have the possibility to be offset by even greater gains if we lean in on God. Again, back to that book, Why a Suffering World Makes Sense. The author, Chris Tiegreen, says this: without pain or loss or suffering, there is no framework for understanding some of God's most precious attributes, no canvas on which he can spread out his most beautiful colors. I really want this to stick with us today. So at the risk of being repetitive, let me say again, how can a merciful God show mercy in a world that has never erred? How can he show himself as warrior or conqueror without enemies? How can he show himself as deliverer unless there's a captivity? Or as a refuge unless there's a threat? Or as a healer unless there's a sickness? Or as a forgiver unless wrongs have been committed? God allows all of the evil in the world, especially in including the evil choices that every human being makes. He allows all of it, knowing that as we experience the knowledge of evil that he warned about in the Garden of Eden, we would also in greater ways experience the knowledge of good, the knowledge of the goodness of God. So let me say this. The knowledge of the good of God is expanded precisely because we experience evil. I think virtually all of us, many non-Christians even, are familiar with the story of the prodigal son that Jesus tells in Luke chapter 15. A man has two sons, and the younger one asks for his inheritance early. Well, if you understand a little bit about Hebrew history and Hebrew culture, inheritances were only given when a patriarch died. So essentially the son, by asking for his inheritance early, he is insulting the father in one of the worst ways imaginable, along the lines of, I wish you were dead rather than alive. I would prefer the benefits of your deadness over the benefits of your aliveness. Now listen to me. The bond between the father and son up until this time has been based on their shared life experiences together. The father has provided for his son. He has raised his son. He certainly disciplined his son, and that was probably painful for both of them. He has loved his son. He has protected his son. He has prepared an inheritance for the son. But I asked myself the question this week, on a scale of 1 to 10, how strong was the bond between them at the time when the son comes to the father and asks for the inheritance early? Well, the son was pretty casual, pretty flippant about just abandoning that relationship for financially how he might benefit out of that. So if I was to say how strong that bond was, I would say maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, it might be right in the middle, maybe at about a 5. So then the son takes everything that the father gives him, his share of the inheritance, squanders it all, and then returns filthy, having lived among pigs for an extended period of time. And he comes prepared to put his face in the dust before his father, offering to live as a servant. But the Father runs to him. The Father opens his arms to him. The Father takes his robe and gives it to the Son. He takes his ring and he hands it to his Son. He makes sure that the Son has sandals on his feet. He orders his servants to organize, to prepare an incredible celebration, a feast unlike the household seems to have ever had up until that point in time. All of those things are the package of forgiveness that he offers to his Son. Things that the Son has never seen before or experienced before in the relationship that he had with his dad. So now I ask this question. At this point in their relationship, on a scale of 1 to 10, how strong is the bond between them? I think both of them would have said 9 or 10. What has made it different? Here's what's made it different. The loss that the Son has experienced and the loss that the Father has experienced. I mean, his wealth was essentially just completely slashed as the Son took what was given to him. The loss that the Son has experienced as well as the Father has allowed their relationship to grow deeper because the as yet unknown depth of forgiveness that the Father extends to the Son had never been experienced by either one of them up until that point in time. While the loss is regrettable and certainly a source of pain for them, what they gain afterwards is incalculable. It's irreplaceable. The Son finds out that his Father was a far greater person than he had ever realized, something that he never would have known if he hadn't experienced so much loss. Now contrast that with the older brother, who had never rebelled, who had always done what the Father had expected him to do. And although he doesn't experience nearly the level of loss as the younger brother, this older brother also doesn't experience anywhere near the same depth of forgiveness from his father, the same depth of appreciation for his dad. It is the depravity and the suffering of the rebellious son that throws into stark relief the character of the Father. The amazing extent of this Father's love would remain hidden, present but entirely concealed, if there was no rebellion on the side of the Son to bring it out of the Father. So the product of the younger son's sin is a greater knowledge of the Father's good, the Father's goodness. Listen to this. There is always something greater about God to be discovered when we hurt and experience loss. As I think about this crisis that we find ourselves in, that's both a medical crisis as well as an economic crisis, I think Satan wants us to focus on the problem of the losses that people are experiencing right now, the problem of our pain. But I believe God would want us to focus on the promise of our losses, the promise of our present pain. Because that promise is that we can have more of an understanding, more of a deeper knowledge of God's goodness toward us than perhaps we've ever experienced before. God has no plans to waste anything from this crisis. In the book of Revelation, the last book in the Bible, it's almost as if as you work your way through the book, like there's a stage of eternity that is being prepared and that has been completed, and there's visions that give us the idea of a platform, a throne room that is being revealed, and Jesus is seated at the right hand of the Father. And as you read throughout the book, you will see periodically various individuals, various groups of individuals breaking out into song, into just wild celebration of this God that is going to be the focal point of our celebration throughout all of eternity. The songs are sung by hundreds of millions of people and by the angels themselves. So if you can do this with me, if you can picture the stage of heaven as the final scene of the period of human history, earthbound human history, if you can picture that stage when God is celebrated in song as the ransom for mankind, that's what Jesus was, as our Redeemer, as our healer, God as warrior, God as deliverer, God as refuge, God as conqueror. If you can picture all of that, then tell me, what would you expect the timeline of human history before that to include? Before that moment that would lead to God being celebrated by a massive amount of people with a wild celebration, saying, He is our warrior, He is our conqueror, He is our deliverer, our redeemer, our savior, He is our king. What would you expect to find in the thousands of years leading up to that moment? I think it's simple. You would expect to find a creation exactly as what we experience and see around us right now. A devastated and fallen human creation, harassed and attacked by an enemy. You would expect to find painful losses. You would expect to find broken hearts. You would expect to find physical and emotional abuse that results in great suffering for all of mankind. But in the very center of that human history, you would also, I believe, expect to find the Messiah doing exactly what Jesus did on the cross, paying that ultimate sacrifice for us, looking from his vantage point on a cross, on a hill where he could see below him hundreds, perhaps thousands of Jewish people and Roman soldiers, seeing broken people with huge losses, people filled with rage and hate. Jesus would be giving himself totally in order for our greatest losses to become even greater gains. Friends, listen to me. Something greater lies beyond the loss. Something greater lies beyond the pain and loss of these days for Christ followers who expect God to redeem all of it. The cross guarantees that what we stand to gain will be far greater than any loss that we could ever endure. Let me bow for a word of prayer. Whether it's stories that we read online or hear about on the radio or news reports that we might see on television throughout the crisis that we find ourselves in right now, God, I believe that there is an enemy of our souls that wants to convince us that great things are being lost and can never be replaced, that the greatness of what has been lost by our society and what we're enduring right now can never be matched, can never fully be recompensed. And that is a lie from the pit of hell. I can see throughout Scripture that each time that people experience loss, if they lean in on their God, and that's what we want to do, that's what I want to do, if we lean in on our God, that you have the capacity, you have the desire to restore all of that. And so that is our hope today, Lord God, that in these evil times that we find ourselves in, these hard moments, these hard weeks and months, that every loss that we experience, that you would open our eyes to see what might be behind it will end up being an even greater gain. Oh God, reveal yourself to us in far greater ways in the future than what we've ever seen in the past. That is my prayer for myself and for your sons and daughters, my brothers and sisters in Christ. I ask it in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you have a great week.